Generation X grew up with a quiet sense of being emotionally unsupervised, absorbing a world where institutions felt distant and promises felt conditional. This distance cultivated a sharp internal observer, someone who learned early to rely on themselves while doubting the reliability of larger systems. The result was not loud rebellion but a cool, inward skepticism that questioned motives before trusting outcomes. Cynicism became less a mood and more a survival strategy, a way to stay intact in an environment that rarely explained itself. The cultural backdrop surrounding Generation X often communicated absence rather than guidance, and that absence shaped their psychological posture. With authority figures frequently distracted or disillusioned themselves, many learned to read between the lines rather than accept surface explanations. This habit sharpened perception but also fostered a default suspicion that sincerity was a performance. Over time, emotional restraint became safer than emotional exposure. Media saturation without moral framing added another layer to this alienation. Images of excess, collapse, and irony flowed freely, but meaning had to be assembled privately. This encouraged a detached gaze that could critique everything while committing to very little. The dark side of this posture is an emotional distance that protects against disappointment while quietly reinforcing it. Cynicism in Generation X is often misread as apathy, but psychologically it functions as a filter against manipulation. Having witnessed repeated mismatches between words and actions, many learn to expect inconsistency. This expectation reduces shock but also dulls hope, creating a low-grade pessimism that can feel realistic rather than tragic. The inner world becomes pragmatic, controlled, and emotionally economical. Alienation also emerged from being culturally overshadowed, positioned between louder generations with clearer narratives. This in-between status reinforced the sense of being unseen, which deepened self-reliance but weakened collective identity. When you are rarely addressed directly, you learn to stop waiting for recognition. That lesson hardens into a quiet withdrawal. The internal dialogue of many in Generation X reflects this history of emotional self-management. Feelings are acknowledged privately, edited internally, and rarely dramatized. This creates emotional competence on the surface but can hide unresolved grief or anger beneath. The darkness lies not in chaos but in compression. Workplace experiences often mirrored early life dynamics, reinforcing distrust. Loyalty was marketed but rarely reciprocated, and adaptability was rewarded more than dedication. This confirmed the belief that systems extract value without offering care. The psychological response was strategic detachment rather than protest. Relationships were also shaped by this cautious worldview. Emotional intimacy was desired but approached carefully, often with humor or irony as a buffer. Vulnerability felt risky in a world that seemed to punish it. As a result, connection was filtered through wit, understatement, and controlled disclosure. The humor associated with Generation X carries this darkness elegantly. Sarcasm became a language for truth-telling without exposure, allowing critique without confession. Laughter softened despair while keeping it at a manageable distance. This style bonded peers while quietly reinforcing emotional walls. At its core, the cynicism of Generation X is less about bitterness and more about self-preservation. It reflects a psychological environment where belief felt dangerous and trust felt naive. The darkness is subtle, living in restraint, irony, and the careful management of expectation. It is a psychology shaped by learning how not to be disappointed. Emotional self-containment became a defining psychological trait for Generation X, shaped by early experiences of emotional inconsistency. Many learned that expressing need did not guarantee response, so need was minimized internally. This internal regulation created strength, but it also encouraged isolation. Feelings became something to manage alone. Control emerged as a substitute for security. When external stability felt unreliable, internal discipline became the anchor. This manifested as emotional independence, problem-solving skills, and a resistance to emotional chaos. The shadow side of this control is difficulty asking for help even when it is needed. The inner world of Generation X often prioritizes competence over comfort. Being capable felt safer than being cared for, and self-sufficiency became a core value. This orientation reduced vulnerability but also limited emotional nourishment. Psychological safety was built through mastery rather than connection. Emotional expression was often filtered through productivity or humor. Rather than naming pain directly, it was transformed into action or irony. This kept life functional but left some emotional experiences unprocessed. The darkness lies in what is postponed rather than what is expressed. This pattern also influenced how stress was handled. Rather than externalizing distress, it was absorbed and compartmentalized. Over time, this can lead to emotional fatigue that is difficult to articulate. The person appears calm while carrying a quiet internal weight. Control extended into identity formation, where flexibility was valued over rootedness. Adapting to change became second nature, but stability was rarely internalized as permanent. This created resilience but also a lingering sense that nothing is fully secure. Emotional grounding remained provisional. In relationships, self-containment sometimes appeared as emotional distance. Partners might experience reliability without emotional transparency. Love was shown through consistency rather than verbal affirmation. While this can be deeply loyal, it may also feel emotionally sparse. The fear underlying this pattern is not intimacy itself but dependence. Depending on others felt historically risky, so autonomy became emotionally charged. Even when trust was present, full emotional surrender remained rare. The darkness is a guarded heart rather than a closed one. Professionally, this emotional discipline translated into adaptability and endurance. Many could survive unstable environments without complaint. However, the cost was often internalized stress that surfaced later as burnout or disengagement. Control delayed collapse but did not eliminate it. Ultimately, emotional self-containment in Generation X reflects an adaptive intelligence shaped by uncertainty. It allowed survival and competence in shifting landscapes. Yet it also limited softness, rest, and emotional replenishment. The psychological shadow is not dysfunction but deprivation. Disillusionment formed early for Generation X as grand narratives lost credibility. Promises of progress, stability, and reward often failed to materialize as expected. This produced a psychological realism that rejected idealism without fully embracing despair. The result was a grounded but wary outlook. Rather than protesting loudly, many practiced quiet defiance. Compliance was surface level, while inner allegiance remained conditional. This created a dual consciousness where participation did not imply belief. The darkness here is subtle resistance rather than open rebellion. Authority was approached pragmatically rather than reverently. Respect was earned through consistency, not position. This skepticism protected against blind obedience but also weakened faith in leadership. Trust became transactional rather than relational. Disillusionment also reshaped ambition. Success was redefined away from traditional markers toward personal autonomy. The pursuit of meaning replaced the pursuit of status, but meaning itself was treated cautiously. Nothing was allowed to become too sacred. This attitude fostered creativity and independence, but it also encouraged emotional distance from collective dreams. Shared futures felt fragile, so personal stability took priority. The inner world became the primary site of investment. Collective hope faded quietly. The defiance of Generation X often lives in refusal rather than confrontation. Refusal to over-identify, to overcommit, to be emotionally exploited. This boundary setting preserved selfhood but limited communal momentum. The darkness is in disengagement rather than destruction. Culturally, this disillusionment expressed itself through irony and minimalism. Excess was mocked and sincerity was treated with suspicion. This aesthetic mirrored an inner world that valued restraint over spectacle. Emotional understatement became a moral stance. In personal life, expectations were kept deliberately modest. Anticipating disappointment reduced its impact. This psychological strategy protected against heartbreak but also narrowed emotional range. Joy was experienced cautiously with an exit plan. The quiet defiance also shaped parenting and mentorship styles. Many avoided replicating authoritarian patterns, choosing instead to offer autonomy. Yet emotional guidance was sometimes implicit rather than explicit. Freedom was given, but direction was understated. The dark psychology of Generation X in this realm is not nihilistic but guarded. It reflects a generation that learned to survive without illusions. Their defiance whispers rather than shouts, preserving dignity while accepting limits. It is a psychology built on knowing what not to believe.